Today on The Sports Agents, we celebrate the life of a true British sporting icon, the Hitman, Ricky Hatton.
His death shocked the world yesterday at just 46 years old. He was a fighter who turned boxing into a spectacle for an army of fans. When he went to Las Vegas to fight Floyd Mayweather, it was as if half of the UK had followed him.
Arguably his best night, shocking the great Kostya Tszyu 20 years ago in front of a sold-out Manchester arena at a time when British boxing seemed a little bit lost. Maybe it's a bit akin to how it feels now, drifting between eras. Well, Hatton stepped out of the shadows and we all fell in love with him.
He was a ferocious fighter. He was a superstar. He was a Mancunian who you felt you could go to the pub with and talk about the football or Oasis.
In retirement, he was open about his struggles with his mental health and during his career with addictions. And he helped countless people by being brave enough outside the ring to talk about all of that.
Welcome to the Sports Agents.
Hello, Mark.
Hi, Gabby. How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm okay. It's just a sad feeling, isn't it, really? And this podcast will be dominated by Ricky Hatton and memories of Ricky Hatton, both as a man and as a fighter. And it has. His death has just overshadowed the whole weekend and dominated the whole weekend. And yeah.
And we are of a certain age that, that period of Ricky Hatton dominance, I think our peers as well, I know the person that told me, he's one of the editors of Match of the Day. I was working with him yesterday on the rugby and he came over to me and he said, "Have you seen this?" And we both kind of, I think, just totally shocked. And then your memories start kind of coming back of somebody who, was such an important part of the British sporting landscape.
I watched my son play Sunday League football yesterday. First time I've watched him play football in about 4 years. I got back in the car and I turned the radio on and I actually heard Bunsey on 5 Live struggling to talk, actually, like trying to hold the tears back. And I thought, I have no idea. I hadn't looked at my phone. I have no idea what's happened here. And then obviously they sort of recap that they were talking about Ricky Hatton. But to hear Steve like that really, really brought a lump to my throat.
So we will
yeah.
pay further tribute to him in this episode. Another busy sporting weekend, of course, with the World Athletics Championships getting underway. Sadly not working on it this year because I'm doing...
Because you've got too much other work.
But I was glued to yesterday morning's 100 meters, and Usain Bolt was in the stadium in Tokyo, and of course the cameras couldn't stay away from him to watch this and to watch what looks like, finally, for Jamaica, another era of greatness, because America has dominated since Usain retired. But Oblique Seville, who's 24 years old, was the winner, and he ended up 9:77 his time. He had to get a PB, I think, to win that race. It was so stacked, and the scenes just reminiscent actually of that kind of era that Usain was dominating, kind of around kind of 2008 onwards, seeing all the Jamaicans going crazy in Tokyo. And what was lovely as well about that stadium, of course, it was the Olympic Stadium that was empty in 2021, and to see it full and to see the crowds enjoying it, it felt like a nice bit of redemption for Tokyo.
Does he now have to wear the mantle of the new Usain Bolt?
Well, he's got the same coach, Glenn Mills, and they've said for a while that he could be the new Usain Bolt. It's terrible moniker, isn't it?
It is. It
is.
New
anything is awful, and he's not. He's not a natural kind of. He's not a huge showman. He did rip his shirt off at the end, but he's not kind of that person that you see jumping up and down. And Usain did that because it was part of his. We're going to talk later on about Ricky Hatton's authenticity.
Yes.
Usain was absolutely, that way all the time. So I think it's really unfair, isn't it, to kind of look at the next generation and try and compare.
I mean, there were about 30 years of Manchester United wingers who had to cope with being the next George Best. I mean, it was just like, God grief, give them a chance. Anyhow, on the athletics, remember you can catch up with our interview with Eugene Amadadzi from this weekend. All our episodes are on YouTube, Global Player, or wherever you get your pods, hit subscribe or follow so don't miss a show. But that interview with Eugene was one of our favourites from the 2 years that
Absolutely.
we've
And
been
he's yet
doing
to
this.
compete because they've had the mixed 4x4, but they haven't had the 4x1s yet. So you will see him in Tokyo competing, and hopefully Great Britain will pick up something from that because they haven't had a very good opening weekend so far. And they've had the relay 5th, which they were hoping for a medal from, and not
Sprints didn't go well, did they?
not so not so well. Obviously, Dina did creep into the final but came last. So yeah, it's not been a glorious weekend.
Get in touch with us, please, via email, thesportsagents@global.com, or on our socials, or via the link in the episode description. And please rate, follow, and subscribe. I'm going to end that there because... No, I'm not. I'm just going to say, make sure you rate, follow, and subscribe, because then it was written down for me. It means a lot to us. And I thought, well, I mean, it does, but then it's just written down for me. So it's not going to come from the heart.
It means
so I made a hash of that.
to us. It really does.
It does, yeah.
Okay, next up, we are going to turn our attention to the late, great Ricky Hatton, truly one of Britain's most loved boxers. And today we're going to remind ourselves why. Before we speak to our guest today, we've also been catching up with Eddie Hearn ahead of a special interview for the weekend edition, which is out this Friday.
Eddie was a rival promoter for Matchroom, and their big boom really came just after Ricky's prime. So we asked him about the blueprint Hatton set out for the likes of Anthony Joshua. Your memories of Ricky Hatton and what he did for the sport and what he did for fans of the sport.
I mean, he's the same age as me. But I see him as like this senior legend of the sport. I mean, he was like the last of the dying breed before social media, right? So the real working class hero that was the man of the people, right? Never did anything for views or likes or, never showed any act of kindness and asked for it to be filmed and put out there by his PR team. He never had a PR team. In fact, he would go out and he would fight, and then next thing he would be in the pub in Manchester. And guess what? That's why 30,000 or 40,000 people travelled to his fights in Las Vegas. I mean, you'll never, ever, ever see anyone as popular as that. And I've never found one person who's ever said a bad word about Ricky Hatton. And I work in boxing, where people slag each other off non-stop. Not one bad word. Everybody loved him. And there was one person in the whole industry that didn't love Ricky Hatton. And that says it all.
Andy, thank you very much for joining us. Where do you place Ricky Hatton in the sort of importance of British boxing over the last 50, 60 years?
I've been thinking about this all day, and in my viewing lifetime, which is the last 40 years, I would say, I'm 47, so I'll put it at 40 years. I would say that of all the fighters that I've seen come through British boxing, and we've had some fantastic names over that period who've achieved enormous things, I would say that his legend will be the one that will endure the most. I would say that he will be the biggest figure in boxing folklore from this period, from that 40-year period, because of the things that he achieved, but also because of the way that he went about things, the character that he was, the personality that he was. I think he was an enormously influential figure. And another thing about him that sometimes people either aren't aware of or just forget is that he achieved what you could describe as terrestrial fame, old school fame, kind of 1980s style fame, without actually ever boxing on terrestrial TV, which a while ago seemed impossible, didn't it? It was one of the criticisms of how the media has developed, that people just wouldn't emerge in that way, like Frank Bruno in the 80s or Barry McGuigan, but Hatton did it. And that was down to just the all-round package that he was. And in terms of all-round packages, I just don't think we'll ever see another one like him. I genuinely don't.
Yeah, I think it's important, probably, isn't it, Andy, to put into context actually what the media landscape was like, because people now are used to kind of the way boxing, DAZN's a kind of stranglehold on boxing, and whether or not BBC I know is going to be showing some boxing in the near future, but there's very little boxing that happens on terrestrial television. But Sky, at the point that Ricky Hatton was breaking into his professional career, Sky kind of owned boxing, didn't it? And I imagine for Ricky, you know, that relationship was just so symbiotic. It was a perfect storm, because they would be thrilled to have a fighter like Ricky Hatton on the station. Tell us a bit about that relationship.
He was just the perfect person, because if you look at the 90s, there was Nassim, and he was Nassim Hamed. He was an enormously popular fighter, and he brought something new in terms of the showbiz and the glitz and the glamour. But in terms of personality, he was completely different to Hatton. He was a love me or hate me, you'll still watch me kind of character, whereas Hatton was a throwback. He was old school, if you like. He was somebody who everybody related to and identified with, and he had the support of the football club. He had the support of the football supporters, because where he lived, everybody did support football. It wasn't a specifically football thing. It was just, that's the society and the group that he grew up with, and they knew him, and everybody felt like they knew him, whether they did or they didn't. And if you were a sports channel like Sky, and obviously football has always been the real driving momentum behind what you do, because it's so incredibly popular, and at that point was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, to have this fighter who had all of that support with him not right from the start, because these things don't happen by accident. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it, but it just became this rolling stone that just gathered momentum and gathered momentum. And then it turned out as well that he was as good as he was, because nobody can know that in the early stages, because boxing is a strange sport where essentially you arrange your own fixtures. And if you've got somebody who sells a lot of tickets and who's really popular, but you suspect they might not be that good, then you can just be really careful with them and just try and keep that going for as long as you can. But as fights went on, you could see that he was really good, and there were possibilities, and he was really good to watch. So he was just entertainment and the following packaged into one. And so for Sky, as you say, where you can really give the exposure and get him on Sky Sports News as much as you possibly could. I mean, you might have been working there around those kinds of times. You could just go to town on somebody in a way that terrestrial TV just wouldn't have the space for.
You talked about how you build a career and how you don't sell out places right at the very start, because word has to spread of both style and talent. You know, when you actually look at Ricky's career, he turned pro at 18. And by the time he stopped fighting, I know there was a planned comeback to come. But by the time he stopped fighting, his record was still phenomenal, wasn't it, Andy? I mean, 48 fights, 45 wins, 32 knockouts, just the 3 losses. I mean, that record, having started at 18, stands up with the best of them, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. And that's a lot of fights. And he boxed a lot when he was young. And that's how you do it, because you need to get people that seasoning. You need to get people that experience. You want to test them without overwhelming them, because boxing is this very, very physical sport. It's a brutal sport physically and mentally. So the matchmaking's key. If you throw somebody in too deep, too quickly, and they get a terrible beating, they can sometimes never be the same again, because mentally the scars are just too much for them. So they did a really good job with him on that front. And as you say, when you look at the career overall, just the 3 defeats, the final one I don't even count against Vyacheslav Senchenko, because that was about more than just whether he won or lost. That was something he needed to do for himself. But the other 2 defeats were against Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao at stages of their career where you could argue they were at their absolute peak. 2 of the best fighters of all time, 2 modern greats, certainly. And losing to them there's no shame in it. But the problem was for Hatton, or one of the problems for Ricky, was that they just don't see it that way. They don't see it that way. And I remember talking to him in depth about those 2 fights, because for a book I wrote a couple of years ago, where I was looking in forensic detail into the knockout and what it does to people, whether you score one, whether you suffer one. And I wasn't sure if he'd do it, to be honest, because why would you want to do that? Talk in detail about those 2 nights, and I almost didn't ask him, but he did it, and he was really generous with his time, and that in itself tells you loads about who he is. But he found it very difficult to get over those defeats, because they hold themselves to such ludicrous standards, elite level athletes. Nothing is ever enough, is it? They always feel like they should be doing more. I was thinking about the Olympic logo the other day, and it's all about more, isn't it? Swifter, faster, swifter, higher, stronger. And that's how they are. So it's difficult for them to look at the career in the whole, like you just did there, chappers, and feel happy with what they've done. It can take a really long time for them to finally come to that place where they're proud of themselves, because after the Mayweather fight, he didn't want to go out. He felt like everybody knew. He felt that he let everybody down, that they were ashamed of him, that people were laughing at him. It was just this shattering blow to the ego. The ego is the thing that drives them all, isn't it? That can drive them to incredible heights, but then it can be really fragile.
He gave 30,000 Brits the best few days of their lives that weekend. That was one of the iconic sports trips to be on.
But for him, I guess that doesn't, I suppose for him, it's not, he's thrilled he's got fans and he's thrilled they're there. He wants to give them an even better time, to come away with that win, and it didn't happen. And obviously he's talked in recent times about his struggles with mental health, and he's talked about his addictions as well. And his weight did fluctuate a lot, didn't it, between fights? When you look at a boxer in the round and you can kind of look back at the ones that can come through the experience of losing and, and getting back up and, completing a career, is there any kind of pattern as to how that happens? Is it about the people around them? Is there anything that you can point to that, these people were good for that boxer, or their lifestyle, was always going to kind of lead them into places where they found darkness? It's so hard to finish a career as a boxer, isn't it? And feel well-rounded, grounded, and happy, it would seem.
It is. It's very, very difficult, and I'm fascinated by it. And the answer really is that it's a very individual thing. In terms of the physicality of it, even why somebody might appear to be more susceptible to a punch than somebody else is almost on levels a spiritual thing. If you just assume that they're all well trained, which they are, some people just seem to be able to refuse it almost, whereas with others, it's something that happens. And how you react to it, how you react to a defeat, is something that you're never really going to know until it happens. That there are so many unknowns in the sport until you experience them. And when it came to Ricky, the conclusion I kind of drew when I looked into all of this with the help of other people, and I had a really interesting conversation with Steve Bunce about it, is that he got a 43-0 when he boxed Mayweather. And it wouldn't have been that he would have thought that he couldn't lose, because he'd lost in the amateurs. He got knocked out in the amateurs. So he knew that it could happen. But you will get to a point in your career whereby you think, okay, well, I could lose, but it'll be a distance fight, a close fight, one of those ones where you don't get it on the cards, because that can happen to anyone. And I dust myself down and I would go again. I would imagine he got to the point where he felt like, okay, that could happen. But I don't think he imagined that what could happen to him against Mayweather and then against Pacquiao, that could happen, because that would have been unthinkable, that you could get dismantled like that. And I think that was the thing that he really struggled with, and that he found very, very difficult to accept, because that's not what happened to him. He did that to other people. And that's when the ego and the fragility of the ego, this thing that has served you so well, and the pride and the self-belief that at times does have to border on a bit of delusion, that has served you so well, all of a sudden that gets cracked. And it's a very, very difficult thing to repair. Some people manage to do it, but if you get to that point in your career where you've achieved that much, and then all of a sudden you're going for the very, very top prize, and it looks like this other person is maybe just a bit too good for you, there's not really much consolation you can take in that. We can talk about it, but we're not them, are we? They are this different kind of breed altogether, and it's a really hard way to live your life. I'm not jealous of it at all. When I was a kid, like we all did, I'm sure you think, God, I'd love to play for England and do this and do that. But actually, when I look at what they have to give, I couldn't do that. I couldn't deconstruct my own life like that with that kind of harshness. It's a real price they pay.
and yet he was adored. He was adored, not just in Manchester, but across the country. And one of the many articles I've read today saying, if you look at all the British boxers throughout the years, he is up there with, in the opinion of Rick Broadbent in the Times, up there with Cooper and Bruno as Britain's most loved boxer.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I would absolutely agree with that, because I've never met anybody who's told me about even a disappointing experience they had with Hatton, because people are in incredible demand, aren't they? And you've spent a lot of time around, you've spent much more time around really, really famous people than I have. And you know that people aren't always very polite. They kind of look upon athletes as being their own property. They don't know them, but they feel like they know them. And they can kind of tend to grab people and demand this and demand that. And sometimes you'll catch somebody at the wrong time, and there might be a bit of an incident. But I've never heard anyone say that about Hatton, ever. The thousands and thousands of people who would have encountered him all walked away with their own personal Hatton memory, a half a pint or a couple of pints and a conversation. And they kind of got what they came for. And he would give that to people. And again, that's exhausting. He did thrive off it. He did feed off it. That is how he liked to do things. And it was an enormous part of why he was as popular as he was and why he had the support that he had. But to be that kind of generous in giving of yourself to other people when you're in that cocoon of being an elite level athlete, it is kind of incredible. And people do look at his career, and you mentioned earlier on, Gabby, that he used to blow up in weight, and people would analyse it. If you're going to do it from a scientific point of view and think, well, could he have been even better? Yeah, he probably could have been if he hadn't done what he did in between fights. But if he hadn't done what he did in between fights, because when he was training, he was training. When he went into the monastery, as he described it, that's where he was, and you wouldn't see him. But if he hadn't, in between fights, been out and available and accessible, he wouldn't have been who he was, and he wouldn't have been as popular as he was. So I think he did it right. All in all, I think he did it. Right, and I think
he did it the way he was comfortable.
People had asked him, if he had you
Yeah.
fight.
Yeah,
he did. Yeah, he absolutely did.
I was lucky enough to spend a day with him in 2008. We went up to make an Inside Sport episode for the BBC. So the whole day was with him, basically going around. He wasn't in training for anything at the time, going to a gym, spending time at his house, looking at his three-wheel car, because he loved Only Fools and Horses, didn't he? And he had his yellow three-wheeler that was apparently one of the originals that he'd bought in auction. And what struck me was just how rooted he was to his area. There was no way he was going to buy himself a big mansion in Altrincham or something, or he was going to buy the biggest house he could in the area that he was brought up in. Basically, he was not going to leave them, and everything was quite normal. I went into the house expecting some kind of Tyson-esque kind of gilded mansion with people serving him, and it was just all very normal. And he wanted to go to the local cafe to have a bacon sandwich when we were filming, and he wasn't putting that on. There was no entourage around him. There was no manager there. It was just him opening the door to his house and making a cup of tea. And bear in mind, this is a year after the Mayweather fight, so he was kind of still very much in the peak of his powers, and was just delightful. That's all you could say. Somebody who had charm and just a real person, which happens so rarely, Chappers, does it, in our job, to meet somebody on those terms?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're saying that, and when Andy's talked about how he lived his life in between his fights and stuff, it sounds a ridiculous thing to say, but you can't always fake authenticity. And at some point, if you aren't being authentic and you are trying to be somebody that you are not, the British sporting public in particular will see through you and will find you out and will not take you to the heart in the way that Ricky Hatton was taken to the heart of the British sporting public. And that was because he didn't fake a single thing, as you said, Gabby, because he was authentic from start to finish. And that's why people loved him.
And you know, Andy, you think about kind of the Gallagher brothers bringing in his belts and his, you know, his kind of relationship
Rooney
with,
brought in his
yeah,
belts as well, didn't he?
yeah, and his relationship with Oasis, which was of its, you know, when you think about Oasis now, obviously selling out kind of super stadiums yet again. When you think about that period of time and kind of how big they were, how big he was, you know, it was such a unique kind of relationship, that, wasn't it? I can't think of any other boxer really having that level of kind of relationship with another super band in the world that was genuine.
No, nor could I. And it was that kind of he came along at exactly the right time, didn't he? Because he was just so kind of, for want of a better phrase, he was on trend because, you know, he's a year younger than me, Ricky Hatton. So I followed him really, really closely because you tend to gravitate, don't you, when you're a sports fan, to people who are your age, because what they're doing at the same age as you just seems even more stupefying. It's in a way you can identify with it, but in a way you completely can't, because when he was beating Kostya Tszyu, I can't remember what I was doing exactly, but it definitely wasn't that. And Oasis were massive in the mid-90s and carried on beyond that. And then there was this huge kind of allure to Manchester at that period as well. And Manchester City had gone through the doldrums and they got relegated a couple of times. And I remember at university watching that Nicky Weaver penalty save and supporting Manchester City because of Oasis and because they were authentic, because if you were a glory hunter, you'd be on the other side of town. That was always the argument, wasn't it? And it was just this rolling wave of stuff. And Manchester was just really, really cool at that point. And then you had this guy who was incredible to watch, who sold all these tickets, who had this style inside and outside of the ring that people just loved. And authenticity is the word, isn't it? Because it was effortless for him. And it was effortless because that was him. He wasn't trying to mind his P's and Q's and remember what you should say in this situation. And, you know, if I was actually a man of the people, what would a man of the people say to that? And, you know, he wouldn't. And you said, Chappers, about people seeing through it. Football fans, particularly, if he wasn't really a Manchester City fan, they would have seen through it in a heartbeat. Because I've seen other people try it, the football club thing, and it's failed. Others have tried it and it's worked, like Josh Warrington, Chris Billam-Smith, Callum Simpson now with Barnsley. And it's real, and that's why it works.
Yeah.
But if it isn't real, they will see through you. And it's not just the fact that they probably won't come, they actively will not come. And it will become a thing not to go. So, you know, the City thing it wasn't a thing. It was him, wasn't it?
It was just him. Just him. Andy, thank you very much for coming on this afternoon. Thank you. Adam, thank you very much for joining us. In all of the discussion about Ricky and his life at the moment, and we're hearing about, you know, what he meant to people, but what did you appreciate about him as a fighter, as a boxer?
Well, that's so. There's two things. There's me as a boxing fan, and me as someone that's worked for a long time in the boxing industry that is indebted so much to people like Ricky and Ricky as much as anyone that I can think of. As a fighter, he fought with passion and energy and ferociousness. And skill aside, the one thing a champion needs is that energy, that will to win. And that's something he had in abundance. You could see that he was a passionate man by the way that he fought. And I'm a firm believer that a fighter's style reflects their character, their true, deepest character. And I firmly believe that. And so what that says about Ricky is, and was, full of passion and energy and spirit.
And he didn't shy away from big fights. And we're in this era now where we're so used to boxers apparently doing that, or not taking on the fights that the public want. He took on everybody the public wanted him to take on. And even if that did end in a few defeats, and that, I think, almost makes you warm to him even more, doesn't it? The general public certainly enjoyed that part of his career.
The greatest fighters of all time have all got losses on their records, whether that's Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran. It doesn't matter. The list goes on and on. And for me, the greatest fighters in boxing history all lost. And the reason why they lost is that they had the ultimately competitive fights. And that's what Ricky did. He shied away from nothing. Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, as well as Kostya Tszyu in that phenomenal step up in levels when he won the world championship. He embodied everything that traditionally boxing has always wanted from its champions.
You mentioned the Kostya Tszyu fight there. That was, and I speak as a Mancunian as well. That wasn't just one of the great nights in boxing. It wasn't one of the great nights in sport. It was one of the great nights in the history of this city. I mean, it had everything. Did that night?
It did, and I touched on it before that British boxing as a business at this moment in time is bigger than it ever has been before, and the sport and the business of British boxing is indebted and owes it to fighters from the past and promoters and networks that have kept this sport alive. Some more significantly than others, but we have Sky Sports who kept boxing alive as an industry for decades when nobody else was interested, through Frank Warren as the promoter. And we had fighters like Nassim Hamed and Lennox Lewis and Joe Calzaghe and Carl Froch and David Hay, fighters, Amir Khan, fighters that brought the passion of the general public into the sport. Nobody more than Ricky Hatton.
Did that night change things for so many boxers in a sense of, I want to fight in front of my home crowd? Where and that could be for the 20 years since that, whether that is Amir Khan in Bolton, or Joe Calzaghe in Wales, or Carl Frampton in Northern Ireland in Belfast. Did it change it, do you think, for so many fighters about wanting to fight in front of their home crowd?
Yes, I think Ricky was filling out the Manchester Arena, which is 20,000 on a regular basis before he beat Kostya Tszyu, when he was the WBU champion, and the job that Frank Warren did building this ferocious young talent into the international superstar was a masterclass in promoting, and Ricky fulfilled every part. Now, when promoters and the business look at a fighter and they think, okay, first thing, can he fight? Secondly, what's his style? Is he entertaining? And thirdly, is he popular? Can he sell a ticket? Are the TV networks going to want to show him? And are people going to want to pay to watch this fella fight? Nobody in British boxing has done that better than Ricky Hatton. And I always say, like, the best ticket sellers are the guys that can fight, that are one of the lads. Because when guys are one of the lads, they traditionally have a big following of fellas that they connect to on an everyday level. If you can name any fighter in world boxing history that's done that better than Ricky Hatton, you'll be hard pressed to come up with one.
And to be a kind of all of that, to be the man of the people, or the man of the lad, as you say, and then to be a showman as well in such a natural way. Nothing felt like it was uncomfortable for him. There was no artifice. He was so proud to be a Manchester City fan, but as Mark's already alluded to, somehow managed to unite Manchester as well. So it wasn't an uncomplicated relationship to have Man United fans supporting him, because he was about the city that he was born in, and his Blue Moon entrance, his shorts, everything that kind of gave him that touch with that contact with his community, and yet being a showman was a brilliant masterstroke, wasn't it? A natural way of acting.
He was as authentic as they come. And his authenticity, along with his fighting elements, are what made him that unique sort of meeting of all of the elements that, promoters, boxing fans, and the boxing world crave for. He had it all.
You talked about him not shying away from the big fights, and from your experience of dealing with boxers, was he unusual in how personally he took the defeats? Because when he did lose, and there were very few of them, Adam, that the feeling I think was that he felt like he'd let people down by losing, which is just a ridiculous feeling to have. But that is the one that he had. Is that unusual amongst boxers?
Is it unusual? Not necessarily, but unusual. The level of popularity that Ricky attained as a fighter is unusual. I said that he fought with passion, emotion, and spirit, and that will to win that made him the successful fighter. But these things burn us when things don't. He was in it to win. So when he lost, that passion, that spirit, and that emotion would turn against him. And because he was an authentic one of the lads, man of the people, of course, the natural thing then is that he would turn on himself because what made him so popular and so successful hurt him desperately at times when it didn't go his way.
And he spoke openly in recent years about the battles that he had with his own mind, and also with addictions and drink, and clearly in between, even in his career, in between big fights, his lifestyle would sometimes swing into a direction that wasn't healthy for him. And it was interesting that Amir Khan, in his kind of comments immediately in the aftermath of the news yesterday, referred to his openness, and that boxing needs to have more honest conversations like that, Adam.
I think life needs to have more honest conversations, especially for men, men that are considered to be very masculine and have ego and pride and don't want to show weakness because these are the traditional masculine traits that get protected. And Ricky was so beautifully open about the torment that his thoughts gave him. And the biggest sadness there was that there was sometimes it helps where we can find someone that has the words that we can listen to and absorb, that can steer us in the right direction or steer us away from the negative connotation of the thoughts that we have. Because let's be honest, the thoughts that come into our head aren't our choice. What's our choice is the attention that we give to them. And because Ricky had that ferocious and energetic energy, that he would give his negative thoughts way too much validity and way too much attention.
Just finally, before we let you go, I think you said very early on, maybe in your first answer, that you from your profession and your sport, you owe him a lot. That's what you said.
Oh yeah, the sport and the business of British boxing owes Ricky Hatton more than it could ever repay him. I was personally fortunate enough to know him professionally and personally, and I got a chance to laugh with him, to work against him, to work with him, to give him a hug. I was fortunate enough to enjoy those brief moments in time, which I'm grateful for. As somebody that works in boxing and has done for years, I acknowledge and will always tip my hat to the fact that it is people like Ricky Hatton, and Ricky Hatton, as much as anybody that I can think of, that has led British boxing to the level that it is today as a sport and as a business.
Not a great time to talk to you, really, Adam, but thank you, because it's been fascinating to talk to you on what is obviously a sad time.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to finish by sending my love to his family and loved one and his kids.
Thanks then to Andy Clarke and Adam Booth and Eddie Hearn. And the full episode with that Eddie Hearn interview will drop on Friday in the weekend edition. So hit subscribe or follow and you won't miss that.
That's it for us today. Got a question for us or a topic you'd like us to cover on the podcast? You can get in touch via email at thesportsagents@global.com or on our socials or via the link in the episode description. And we'll see you on Thursday. Thanks for listening.